Well, hello and welcome to Tuesdays with the Pilgrim and our Christmas special. Today you don't need to sit and watch me read, but go about those chores you need to get done. Wrapping Christmas presents, decorating the tree, baking, whatever it is, and just let me play in the background and you can listen to the story. The story for today is by Margery William Bianco, titled The Little Guest. Every year at about Christmas time, the Holy Child would come to visit the nuns. He came with his mother and Saint Joseph and the shepherds and all of the pet animals, and they stayed together in a little house that the nuns framed up for them. The house stood on a table in the entryway just outside the chapel. First, there was a white cloth over the table, with lace edges hanging down. On this stood the house. It only had a roof and one wall at the back, so that you could see right inside. Behind it were the mountains that Sister Gertrude had made of brown paper covered with sparkly snow. And there were evergreens all around, and ivy, and two real little pine trees growing by themselves in pots. The Holy Child seemed to like his little house. He lay just inside it, smiling, on a bed of straw, with a little white shirt on. He didn't seem to mind about its only having one wall, or that the nuns hadn't thought about putting any furniture in it. He lay there and smiled, with his arms stretched out. His mother and Saint Joseph knelt one on each side, and behind them knelt two angels. That made 5 people, and the little house wouldn't hold any more, so the shepherds had to stand outside as close as they could get. And near them stood the animals, the cow, the gray donkey, and 3 little white lambs, 2 lying down and 1 standing up. The standing up one was a little bigger than the others and had a red collar on. When all the candles were lighted, it looked like a party, with the Holy Child in the middle. Twice a day, going to chapel and coming out, the file of little blue pinafored girls passed the table where the Holy Child lived. 14 heads, 2 by 2, brown and yellow and mouse-colored under their thin starched veils, bobbing by sedately, with wrinkled, kindly Sister Elizabeth in her black robes walking behind. Going to and from chapel, there was no time to pause, because all the older girls walked behind, and one had to keep moving. One had only a glimpse in passing of the little house with all the family gathered around it, bright and dazzling in the light of the wax candles. But every evening at Christmas time, instead of going up the 2 straight flights of stairs to the landing outside the dormitory, where the little girls usually said their prayers, Sister Elizabeth would take them the long way around, down the hall and up the back staircase and through a door by the linen room to the chapel entry. To Louisa, spending her first Christmas with the nuns, there was something very exciting about this detour. The back stairway was rather dark. The boards creaked underfoot, and it had a queer cupboardy smell. There were shadows in corners of it, and the most shadowy place of all was just by the linen room door. Here you had to stand still and wait, and not make any noise, because this was the nuns' part of the house, and next door to the chapel. You had to stand very quietly while Sister Elizabeth's feet in their flat shoes came creak, creak, creak along the passage, past all the little girls in turn, till she reached the door and turned the handle. And then, when the door swung open, there were the candles shining, and the Christmassy smell of evergreens and hot melting wax. And the middle of all this golden brightness was the little Holy Child in his bed of straw. Kneeling on the hard boards that always made her shift and wriggle long before Sister Elizabeth's measured voice reached them with the last Amen, Louisa had a good view of the little house and everything about it. The mountains looked just like real mountains. The snow glittered on the evergreen branches and on the white cotton batting where the shepherds stood. It was as if you could walk right up between the pine trees past the gray donkey and the lambs, straight into the little room where the Holy Child lay. It was all very beautiful, and yet there was something about it not quite right. Privately, Louisa had her own opinion of how the nuns treated the Holy Child. The snow was lovely, so were Sister Gertrude's mountains and the little pine trees. But something better could have been done about the house. There was no furniture. There were no curtains. There wasn't even a rug. It was true that the Holy Child stayed in a bed, but he couldn't be very comfortable in there. It was made of straw, and it looked prickly, and the Holy Child had only a small shirt on. There should certainly have been a pillow, and as long as the nuns sewed so well, they could have made sheets and a quilt, and a little blanket too. Louisa supposed they just hadn't thought about it, which was funny because they had known for days and days that the Holy Child was coming. It was no way to treat a guest. The Holy Child was a guest. Sister Elizabeth had said so. Nuns, Louisa thought, were very curious people. It was unusually cold that Christmas. When you went outdoors, even for a moment, your toes pinched and the wind stung your face. Indoors, the little girls had to wear their sweaters going to chapel and along the corridors, and when they got up in the morning, their fingers were pink and stiff, because the big register in the floor, for some reason or another, was not giving all the heat it should. Sister Elizabeth brought an oil heater and stood it on the dormitory floor, and the children dressed around that. There came the frostiest day of all. Tucked in bed that evening, her toes drawn up in her nightgown to keep them from touching the chilly sheets, Louisa thought about the Holy Child. He must be terribly cold down there. The nuns evidently were doing nothing about it. They didn't even seem worried. They wouldn't mind if the Holy Child froze. The oil heater, turned low, glowed like a red eye in the middle of the dormitory floor. Through the looped-up curtains of her bed, Louisa could see the long shadows that threw across the floor and up the walls. From the other beds came occasional rustlings and the small breathing sounds of sleep. Louisa tried to sleep too, but every time she shut her eyes, she saw the Holy Child with only his little shirt on, lying there on the straw bed as she had seen him that evening. Presently she heard, far off, the hollow 3 tolls of the gateway bell, and after what seemed a very long time, the slow, tired steps of Sister Anne, the prioress, making her last round. She came along the lower corridor and up the stairway carrying her lantern, and then Louisa could hear the clink as she set it down finally at the head of the dormitory stairs, where it would burn until morning. For a little while longer Louisa lay still, the blanket dragged up to her chin. Then very cautiously she pushed back the covers, slid first one leg and then the other out of bed. It was chilly on the floor. Louisa felt for her slippers, pulled on her dressing gown. Edging her way past the other beds with their humped sleeping mounds, she reached the doorway that opened to the landing. There were 2 stairways. One where the lantern stood was that which the children always used. The other, narrower and steeper, led down through the nuns' part of the house to the chapel entry. Little girls had no business here alone, especially at night. Holding her breath, Louisa began to creep down, praying that the boards would not creak. The first landing at the bottom was easy. One turn to the right. There was a big room to cross, lined with closets. Then came a corridor, another little flight of steps, and then one reached the chapel entry. There was nothing to be afraid of in the dark. Louisa knew that. All the same, there were shadows. They reached out after you. They closed in behind you, so you did not dare turn your head. And the corridor was long, much longer than it ever seemed by daylight. It stretched and stretched. It seemed as if you would never get to the end. The entry door was closed. Louisa tugged at it. It did not stir. She tugged again, and it gave suddenly, with a creak that seemed to echo through the whole house. She was in the chapel entry. There were no candles burning. Everything was dim and mysterious. Only a faint, uncertain flicker came from the little red swinging lamp overhead, shining down on the pine trees, the tiny house, and the small waxen figure of the Holy Child. For a moment, in that dim pinkish glow, Louisa stood uncertain, her heart beating very fast. Then she moved closer, nearer still, till her fingers touched the white tablecloth. Resolutely she reached out her hand, snatched the Holy Child from his straw bed, and thrusting him into the warm folds of her dressing gown, turned and ran. In the morning Louisa woke early. She pushed her hand under her pillow, where she had put the Holy Child to sleep the night before, wrapped in a handkerchief to keep him warm. Something very awful had happened to the Holy Child. No one would have recognized him. His limbs had lost their shape. His face was flattened and stuck fast to the handkerchief. He was nothing but a horrible, messy lump of softened wax. It was a judgment. She had been a wicked little girl. Hastily, too conscience-stricken even for tears, she folded the handkerchief back over what had been the Holy Child. But somehow, through her misery, a sense of injustice struggled. She hadn't wanted to be wicked. She had wanted to be good. She wanted to make the Holy Child warm and comfortable. She thought he would understand, and he hadn't understood. He'd melted. What could be done? She couldn't leave him there. She couldn't put him back in the chapel. Had there only been an earthquake then and there, it could have buried her and the whole school and the Holy Child altogether, so that nobody would ever know what had happened. But earthquakes didn't come like that, and the dressing bell was ringing. The ancient mariner with the dead albatross hung about his neck suffered nothing in comparison with Louisa that morning. He at least did not have to carry his burden secretly. He was not in terror every moment that someone would say, "What's that lump inside your frock?" Louisa seemed to hold herself rather queerly all morning. At recess she showed an inclination to sit alone and stiff. The young nun who was in charge of the children called her over. "Why aren't you playing with the others, dear?" I don't know. I think I've got a cold." "You shouldn't sniff like that. Where's your handkerchief?" I haven't got one." Louisa flushed guiltily. It was a lie. She knew where her handkerchief was. Even as she said it, she could feel something slipping right down by her waistband. If only the elastic would hold. "Then I think you had better go and fetch one. Go quietly up and quickly back, and if you meet anyone on the stairs, you can say that Sister sent you." No sign from a relenting heaven could have been more welcome. Clutching her waistband, treading with every precaution until she was at once outside the door, Louisa went. Once she reached the corridor, she flew, still gripping her garments tightly to her. All morning she had prayed for just this chance. When she reached the dormitory landing, she turned neither to the left nor the right, but went straight to the bathroom. This particular bath had been put in when the school was remodeled. It was a high, old-fashioned tub, and underneath it, where the pipes went down, there was a piece of floorboard missing. Louisa knew this, for she had once lost a big glass bead down there. It had rolled under the bath, and she couldn't get it out. What she was going to do was wicked, but it couldn't make things any worse than they were already. She groped, shook herself. Something fell with a little thud to the linoleum. She picked up the Holy Child, handkerchief and all, and lying down flat on her stomach, poked him through the hole and as far in under the floorboards as she could reach. She had done with taking care of him. She had done with trying to be kind to people ever again as long as she lived. 4 o'clock came. 2 by 2 the little girls went into chapel. As they passed the Holy Child's house with the candles blazing before it, Louisa never turned her head. Invisible strings were pulling her, but she dared not look. Nothing had been said all day. Perhaps in chapel they were going to speak about it. Perhaps when they all stood up to go out, someone would step out into the aisle. But nothing happened. The little girls rose, filed one by one out of the straight pews, and joined their ranks, just as usual. Louisa looked straight ahead. She crossed the mat by the chapel door. Now she could smell the evergreens and the hot wax. The warm breath of the candles was right in her face. She had to turn. There was the little house, just as usual. There were Sister Gertrude's mountains, all shiny, and the pine trees and the shepherds and the gray donkey. And there, just where he had always been, was the Holy Child. He seemed to have grown a little, that was all. The candlelight shone on his yellow, tight little curls and his waxen arms stretched out. He smiled at Louisa as if nothing had happened at all. I hope you've enjoyed the story. Kind of a fun one there. Obviously one of the nuns must have noticed and either twigged what had happened or just replaced the babe. But a cute story nonetheless. I hope you have a Christmas miracle this Christmas. May your hearts be filled with love, peace, and joy. And may you embrace a time with family and friends. And remember the reason for the season, our Savior Jesus and his birth. Until next Tuesday, when we'll continue with another Christmas story, because it will still be Christmas season, take care, stay safe, and God bless.